Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's CLO webinar. My name is Alec, and as always, I'm here today to help answer any of your general or technical questions. But before we get started, I'd like to thank today's sponsors at Strivr. I hope everyone is having a great week so far, and I'm excited for today's webcast. Immersive Experiences, TD Bank shares insights on the future of learning beyond e-learning. So my name is Alec. Like I said, as always, I'll be working here in the background to help answer any of your general or technical questions. But before we get started, I'd like to take you through a few key reminders. So first, all audio will be streamed to you through your computer headphones, so adjust your volume there accordingly. If you have any questions, whether technical or content related, please submit those in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. It's easier for me to work with you if you have any technical issues in that Q&A box. And we'll be keeping track of some content related questions to take some at the end if time allows. So again, use the Q&A for any tech questions or submitting content related questions for our guest today. You can chat with your fellow attendees by clicking on the chat icon, also at the bottom of your screen. Click there and let us know where you're joining from. I am producing today's show from the far southwest suburbs of Chicago, about as far southwest as you can get before you're in rural Illinois. So let us know where you're joining from in the chat. I like to see where we get a mixture of people from. So you're going to receive a link of this webinar recording and a follow-up email. Please allow at least 24 hours or so, about a business day before that email is sent. But with that all out of the way, we're going to get things started, and I have a couple great guests with me. First, I have Derek Belch. He is the founder and CEO at today's sponsors over at Strivr. And we got Goran Ilkanizada, the AVP of Enterprise Innovation at TD Bank. I'm very excited to have both of these guests with me today. So Goran and Derek, if you want to go ahead and put yourself on camera, and Derek, take things away.
Awesome. Thank you, Alec, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully we're all doing well. Good morning from the West Coast, where I am in San Diego. Good afternoon if you are anywhere east of Colorado, or where Goran is in Goran, upstate Canada, somewhere north of Toronto. Very north.
Yeah, you got it. I'm in Ottawa. You got it.
Yeah, exactly. So we hope everyone is in for a wonderful discussion today. And our number one goal here is to make this extremely educational. If you've joined Strivr webinars in the past, we try to inform the audience as much as we can about all things related to using virtual reality, augmented reality, et cetera, for training, so you can be more prepared to go back and do this in your own organization. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to throw some slides up. We have a few slides that will kind of serve as information and background here, but for the most part, they're just going to be supporting images while we're talking. So here's the plan for today. First, we're going to do brief introductions and overview, and then we're going to dive headfirst into all things TD Bank. Goran's been gracious enough to join us here. He is the star of the show. I'm not going to steal his thunder. So we're going to dive into TD Bank's experience with virtual reality specifically, and how they're thinking about XR more broadly moving forward. And then at the end, we will leave plenty of time for your questions and discussion. Please feel free to submit questions throughout. There are a number of things that people ask on all of these webinars that we will do our best to proactively get ahead of while we're talking to Goran. And but if for some reason we don't answer your question, please feel free. I will monitor them throughout, and we will make sure to leave at least 20 minutes at the end, and likely more. So with that, Alec already introduced us, but just really quickly, I'm Derek Belch. I'm the founder and CEO of Strivr. I'll tell you more about us in a minute. Goran, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Morning, afternoon, folks. As Derek said, I'm joining from cold Canada right now in Ottawa, our capital city. Just by way of background, I could just share my role at TD is to lead our TD Invent team, which is our enterprise innovation team that goes after what we call big I innovation. And I know that's a lot of buzzwords, but essentially it's while all of our lines of businesses across the bank are going after more incremental innovation and product changes, it's our role to work with them and identify sort of problem statements that they're dealing with. And we'll get into more about how that came to life in the VR XR space. But it's really to go after those, test and learn them, understand if it makes sense for us, and then making a recommendation more broadly, should we scale this across our entire enterprise?
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Great. All right. And before we jump in to Strivr's background, I do just want to address one question that comes up all the time. I'll address it right now. These golf balls behind me, these are not hole-in-ones. If they were my hole-in-ones, I would not be on this call. I'd be somewhere else right now on the PGA Tour. This is a collection of logo balls of every golf course I've ever played. If you play golf, please reach out to me privately after this, and would love to tee it up at some point. All right. So that said, so let me just give, for those of you who don't know us, I know we probably have some repeat viewers to Strivr webinars in the past, but let me just give a brief overview on us. We have if I do say so myself, we have a pretty interesting and unique founding story. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to turn it over to Goran, and I'm going to facilitate a Q&A here. So really quick, I currently reside in San Diego, grew up here, went to Stanford as an undergrad. I played football there, American football, from 2003 to 2007. If you are a college football fan, you may know that those were the dark ages of Stanford football. We had a nice 12-year run after I left. Lucky me. But anyway, came back after school, worked in consulting for a couple of years, ended up going to business school in Los Angeles at USC. And while I was in business school, I had this crazy thought: if I don't see coaching before I turn 30, I'm going to regret it forever. So at this point, if we're following along, I don't need another master's, but the only way to get on the coaching staff at Stanford was to be a graduate assistant. So after my MBA, I returned to Stanford. I was a graduate assistant on the staff, which means that you are a full-time coach and a full-time student. And in exchange, you make about 10 cents an hour over the course of your couple of years there. But therefore, I had to do a thesis. And my thesis was to come up with a way to train football players using virtual reality. And long story short, it was such a successful academic project that Stanford's head coach at the time, David Shaw, literally sat me down and said, dude, you got to get out of here and go start a company. And I would love to give you a check to get you off the ground if you'd be willing to take my money. So David Shaw was our first and only investor for the first couple of years. He wrote us a $30,000 check to get us going. And for the first 18 months or so, we were mainly working with NFL and college quarterbacks. And the thesis at the time, which really hasn't changed, which Goran will talk about later with TD Bank, was, I'm holding a Pico device here. I'm going to hold up some more devices later, but the quarterback puts this headset on their face, and their body might be off the field, but their brain thinks they're on the field, and they are able to engage in a flight simulator-like experience for getting more mental reps associated with playing the position. So we had a lot of success in sports, and then we get this random lucky phone call in 2016, and this guy says, hey, I'm a donor at the University of Arkansas. I just saw your product. I would love to talk to you about employee training. And he was from Walmart, right up the street. And so I headed down there pretty much on a whim. A month later, walked out with a handshake agreement for a pilot. And 3 years later, Strivr was in every one of Walmart's 4,500 stores in the United States, and really kicked off this whole VR in the enterprise thing. So that is us in a nutshell. As it relates to today, we're about 100 employees. You can see the numbers on this screen. I'm very proud to objectively, not arrogantly, say that we are the leading company in the space of using virtual reality. Eventually, this is going to broaden out more to extended reality, XR, which we'll talk about in a minute, but using virtual reality for the purpose of employee training in the enterprise. As you can see here, we've deployed over 30,000 headsets. We've been in over 10,000 locations. We've had just under 1 million different individuals engage in training with a headset on their face. Many of our customers use Strivr more than once. It's not a one and done. So as you can see here, we've actually had more than 2 million sessions. So, again, very proud of what we've accomplished. And I think from a credibility standpoint, especially as we get into the Q&A, we're more qualified than anybody to answer your questions objectively and factually based on our experience. And, whether you work with us or not, it's cool. The next hour is a free education session for you to make the best possible decisions as it relates to moving forward with XR in your organization. On that note, here are some of the results that our customers have seen using XR. This question comes up all the time. We're just going to get ahead of it right now. What is the ROI on this? Well, the ROI is pretty simple. It really comes down to two things: time savings and therefore cost savings, i.e. taking multi-hour e-learning modules that I think we can all admit to ourselves very often go in one ear and out the other. from an information retention standpoint. And then, distilling that down into 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes in a headset, the learning results are just as good or better. So time savings, and therefore cost savings. And then the next one is the holy grail of all learning initiatives, and that is a real world performance improvement. So as you can see over here on the left, we have a very large logistics company that actually, in their pilot in the early part of 2023, saw a 14% improvement in package delivery rates in the real world as a result of using virtual reality training. So that is obviously a tens of millions of dollars benefit to that organization. So ROI, time savings, and therefore cost savings, and real world performance improvement. That comes up on every webinar. We're going to just lead with it right out front. And I'm sure Goran will share a little bit about how TD is thinking about ROI here in a few minutes. Lastly, 2 slides to go before I turn it over to Goran. So, how do you do this? Like, how do you pull this off? How do you scale VR, AR, XR in your organization, 5, 10, 15, 500, 1,000, 5,000 times? So this is what Strivr has built. This is our software platform. I'm sharing this as an example of what we have built, but certainly many of you out there are engaged with other vendors, other partners. Maybe you're doing something internally. That's cool. No matter what you're doing and who you're doing it with, make sure that you push that company and your own internal teams very hard on their software platform. Just like Microsoft Word and Workday and SAP and Ultimate Software, right? If you're going to do anything at scale, it is a software problem, not a hardware or content problem very often, right? So you need to make sure that software is at the center of everything that you do. This is the robust software platform that we have built. And I want to highlight the bottom, which is the least sexy, but very often most important thing on this slide, which is all things security and compliance. I think we all know that the coolest technology pilots known to man will never see the light of day if they can't get through an IT assessment, can't get on a network. It's the boring stuff, but it's super, super critical as it relates to doing anything at scale. So that's the past and the present. Now let's talk really quickly about the future. Again, this is Strivr's approach to leveraging AI in this world. There's a lot of others doing different things out there, but basically what it comes down to is accelerating content creation using generative AI and creating a more realistic simulation-based learning experience, right? The holy grail of all of this is going to be when I can interact with an avatar or interact with some sort of scene, and it's not scripted. It's not linear, right? It can go in a number of different directions, and it very much functions like what is happening in the real world. On the content creation side, AI is allowing Strivr and others in the space to move a lot faster and make even better content in a fraction of the time at a fraction of the cost. So this is how we're thinking about AI moving forward. I'm sure Goran and his team are looking at AI quite a bit in their organization, but we just wanted to make sure that we highlighted that, and happy to answer any questions on that as we go. Okay, so that's it. We're done with Strivr stuff. It's been 13 minutes since the beginning. I've been talking for about 5 minutes. We're going to shift to Goran and TD Bank. Before I start to facilitate a Q&A with him, we're just going to have him say a few words and talk about the bank as a whole, as well as some of the specifics he mentioned around his team earlier. And then we're going to jump into Q&A, and then we'll get to your questions. So Goran, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek. Maybe it'd be helpful just to give you some background on myself. So I've been at TD Bank for about 15 years now, and I actually started on the front lines as a teller in the branches. And so I've done all the roles in our retail branches, including branch manager. And then I've done a bunch of time, about 7-8 years, leading our credit card product team. And then I've joined this innovation team, TD Invent, for about the past year and a half. And so if you think about TD's footprint, we're almost 100,000 colleagues strong. It's the 6th largest bank in North America. If you think of our Canadian footprint, we operate coast to coast. In the US, it's mainly across the East Coast. If you've been to New York, you'd probably see us on every street corner. So a huge footprint there, a really diverse set of customers. We do have operations globally. You can see there 28 million customers served. We have a really high percentage of our customers that engage with us digitally. And when you think about the footprint of our retail branches, we've got about 1,000 in Canada and 1,000 in the US. So a really large footprint. And then when you get a little bit more into my team of TD Invent, we don't look at any, like we don't go into any use case or any problem with a defined technology in mind. So we're not out there, and this is what's worked for us, is we're not out there saying, hey, let's find a problem that VR can solve, or let's find a problem that Gen AI can solve. We're really, our team's mandate is to go around north and south of the border and understand all business problems. And then from there, really go through a design thinking process to assess what is the best technology, what is the best way to tackle this. And so that's where when and if Derek, I'll just kind of tease out sort of how this relationship came about.
Yep.
But essentially, like the problem we had was when we talked to our branch teams, the problem statement that we aligned on is like, how can we make branch training more immersive and engaging? Because if you think of the current state, Derek talked about e-learnings. When you think of the context of what a branch colleague does in terms of giving advice, dealing with challenging conversations, potentially having to like go through a robbery scenario, like these are all scenarios that are very difficult to learn through a two-dimensional e-learning page by page. And to be honest, while you're doing those page by page flips, what ends up happening is you get so distracted. You might have a customer calling you, you might have to go help one of your colleagues, you're getting Teams or Slack messages left and right. So it's hard to really focus. And so once we went through that initial assessment, we landed on like, one of the big problems we need to solve for is just to capture people's attention. And the training that we had in place outside of the two-dimensional e-learning was really just, role plays. Like if you think about role plays and job aids, there's no consistency in that. It might be amazing in one geography, but not so great in another. And so virtual reality is one that we're like, we should really be piloting this. And when we did our research, it, to Derek's credit, it's true. Like it's not bragging, but Strivr really did pop at the top of our list of folks that we wanted to work with. And so we'll talk more about that experience, but just to give you a sense of how that all came about. So yeah, Derek, I'd say that's probably the 101.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. Well, great segue too. So we're going to start, Goran, talking about just the technology itself, right? I talked a little bit about our thesis was athletes back in the day. You just referenced, getting people's attention. For those who are unaware, XR, extended reality, is this umbrella term that encompasses all things augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. I have a number of devices here that I'm gonna hold up. I've got a Meta Quest 3. Okay, I've got a Pico Neo 3. They actually look fairly similar. And then some of you may have gotten your hands on this already. I've also got an Apple Vision Pro. It's very, very, very sexy relative to the other two at least. So moving forward today, we're gonna just call all of this XR. All right. Now, Goran and his team has specifically started with virtual reality, and I'm sure he'll reference that. But we really want to focus on like the big picture moving forward. And so, Goran, I'm teeing you up here. Really curious, this idea of why now, right? Like obviously, you just said that you don't necessarily let the technology dictate what you're doing. Rather, it's the business problem, right? And then you go find the technology. But very curious as to why now, relative to what's going on macroeconomically, maybe relative to what's going on with your workforce, specifically certain hiring trends. Just tell us about more about that. Why now with XR? And then maybe specifically a little bit about the medium we landed on with VR as well.
For sure. I think a big part of it was like when our team wasn't around, we didn't really have like a central team looking at solving problems longer term. It was really a lot of plugging holes and just thinking about existing technologies that folks had. So there really wasn't anyone looking outside, thinking about things like what's the technology that we're going to scale a couple of years from now. It was these are the set of tools that we have now, which were, like I mentioned already, the two-dimensional role-playing face-to-face training, and that's what they felt like was their tool set. So I think us coming around and being that sort of catalyst for change and saying like, let's just look at it a little bit differently. And I've been in roles like that where, we're all in our day to day just trying to move things along, and we're spinning a bunch of different plates and balancing so many priorities that it's hard to, we say come up for air and think about what are the innovative either technologies or solutions that can help us leapfrog into the future. And so XR was a great one because as we like fleshed out that problem statement, I will say, and this probably touches on some questions later on, but I'll just talk about it now. Like it wasn't without skepticism. So like, me and my team might have had some ideas about, okay, this is cool. I even personally had some skepticism, and I'll just be honest, because most of my interactions with XR and VR specifically were, a friend of a friend or a family member had one around Christmas, and we kind of played around with it. Some folks loved it, some thought it was gimmicky, but once the thing that we did that really changed people's minds is when we connected with Strivr and just getting a sample headset sent to us and actually going through a sample experience really is the aha moment across the board. For myself, it made me a believer. And then I'll tell you, like, as we would go across the enterprise, I would get the same initial reaction from every senior leader, including all the way up to our CEO and senior executive team, saying like, okay, cool, like XR is cool or it's cute, but they might have felt it's a little gimmicky. Even our CEO and our set team like went through the sample experience, and like every single person unanimously was like, okay, we get it. Like, we get what you're talking about and we want to explore it further. So it's just a mix of like having a catalyst for change and really being able to like experience it firsthand that led to folks being like, okay, we're open to exploring it.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, you did hit on one of the questions that I was going to ask you later. So I'm glad you asked it now. Okay, so we had you kind of had to work the organization, Goran, and your constituents from maybe FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to being believers, right? And you talked a little bit about how that was done with demo headsets, among other things. Do me a favor, take a step back for us and just talk about how your team brings new technology into the bank, and then specifically with virtual reality, extended reality. How was it similar or different? What was special or not about this one relative to, you said it yourself, candidly, we're honest with people. This is not like download app and go on a web page. I mean, this is buy license now. I mean, this takes some work. So talk us through first, how do you typically bring new technology, and what's the process for piloting things and beyond? And then how did this one differ or not relative to those other experiences?
For sure. So everything our team does is centered around what we call like an innovation framework. So it really starts like ideation, we go through exploration and validation. So it's a pretty prescriptive process. Before we ever actually put it in front of a colleague, we do a bunch of pre-work to go through that. And I mentioned it's a design thinking process, really to just flesh out what are we trying to solve here? And then once we identify the technology, we work to validate it. So we work to whether it's to do demos and whatnot. And the thing with XR, VR specifically, is during the pandemic, we had a bit of support because it was really tough to connect. And so we bootstrapped and did some smaller VR experiences where we onboarded co-ops and students and just to be able to engage them. So that really helped kind of people be like, okay, like we see some initial value. But when you're actually bringing a new technology into such a large regulated industry like banking and finance, especially in Canada and the US, a lot of what Derek mentioned earlier, like the questions are a lot centered around like, what's the security look like? How do people use it? How do we track all these things? So that was a lot of the heavy lifting to bring in a new technology that the bank does not in any way use at scale or is core to our technology. Initial stack is it can be challenging. So we really had to do a lot of just meeting with folks, getting them to experience it, and work with, to be honest, Derek's team to answer a lot of the questions that our infosec, our IT teams would have to get them comfortable on like, why should we be comfortable with a new technology like this? So it's a lot of storytelling in the beginning and getting folks comfortable with the security of a platform like this that even gets you sort of the ticket in the door.
Great, great. Extending on that, Gordon. So you're a little more than halfway through your pilot right now. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing and hearing from a reaction and impact standpoint, and then how you all are thinking about measurement, and how you're building momentum potentially in the organization for going beyond the pilot.
For sure. So if you take a step back on training, we really thought that a pilot would make sense. So we set out to establish what's a statistically significant number of participants. And so what we structured is in Canada, we did about 20 branches. We identified them, and it was important to have diverse geography. So we had pilots running in Toronto as well as in Calgary, just because it's important. Like people might feel differently, they do training differently. So having that as part of our data set was really important. And then, so we launched this back in November. We started with a module that was centered around you having a customer coming in and having to de-escalate a challenging conversation, such as needing to hold someone's check. Someone's coming in with a big deposit, and due to the bank's policies, you need to hold it. And naturally, customers don't necessarily love that, and in some cases, can actually get pretty upset. And so that was the initial module that we launched with. And so what was really important to our pilot success, and I would recommend this to anyone that's doing a pilot, is we needed, like, we could believe in it all we wanted, but we really needed folks in the branches to be we call them ambassadors or champions or whatever you want to say. They were the folks that we got to really believe in the technology and what we were doing. And they were the ones that were really drumming up engagement. So initially, like as Derek mentioned, we're halfway through our pilot right now, and the sentiment has been incredibly strong. Like there's a couple things that we're noticing. One, people love when you're making significant investments in them and their careers, but that only takes you so far. And the feedback that we've actually gotten about it is, I can finally take a step away from my day to day and actually take just 15 minutes, which isn't an incredible time suck by any means, because a lot of our trainings take way longer than that. In 15 minutes, I was able to actually go and practice in a safe space without judgment and learn this and make mistakes. And then the part that they really loved specifically about it, that we've gotten so much feedback, is the fact that once you go through one of these modules, the Strivr platform allows you to kind of listen back and play back the experience to yourself. So you may have thought that you did such an incredible job, but when you hear and see yourself back, you're able to be like, okay, I actually could have done this better. And then the last is the Strivr platform has the ability through speech analytics. And this was so important for us because it's one thing to get this qualitative data from participants through surveys saying like, yes, we loved it. And well upwards of 95, 96% of folks said, yes, we feel more confident as a result of doing this. But actually getting the speech analytics at the end of it to close the loop and have that reporting that showed, hey, the first time they tried it, they actually adhere to our de-escalation model 50% of the time, let's say. And by the time they did it a third time, they would have gotten to theoretically like 75, 80%, not just based on what they're saying, but objective quantitative measures. So that's really been a big key of like actually pulling out success criteria, because where we're going with this, if we want to scale it, it's not like an insignificant investment. And our senior leadership is going to want to know, like, what is the business value that you're actually getting? And so to have this quantifiable sort of set of data that we can feed into a business case is incredibly helpful.
Awesome. I want to stay on this topic for a second. Goran, you mentioned, this is a two-part question. The first one will be very easy because you just said it. I want you to just double down on a little bit. And the second one, I'll give you a minute to think about it. You mentioned like the champions, right? The people at the bank who are the ones promoting this and owning this, so first part of the question, who are those people? Are they branch managers? Are they corporate employees? Are they bank tellers that are putting the headset on, everyone in between? And then after that, I would love for you to talk to the audience about, again, this will be like the third time I've said this term, right? This term FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You mentioned there was skepticism at the beginning, maybe even with yourself. I'd love for you to talk to the audience about this, like, how old are the people that are that are doing this, right? How techie or not, how tech savvy or not are they? We hear a lot from our customers and potential customers, so much fear associated with, well, we're going to lose devices, people are going to steal them, we're going to break them, right? There's and by the way, I get it, right? So again, so who are these champions, and are they, and do you have an inner social media, TD Bank account that you promote this on? Like, talk to us a little more about building that groundswell of support internally. And then second, like, put the audience at ease get them thinking about their questions moving forward related to usage and adoption, and the fear associated with bringing a new piece of hardware in. Hey, how tech savvy do they need to be? Is this only for 22-year-olds versus 58-year-olds, right? Tell us more.
Yeah, it's a great question. If you think about our footprint, so I'll just describe it as you've got such a diverse set of colleagues in our branch, and across 95,000, but specifically in branch, you've got everyone from an 18-year-old teller that this is their first job that they've ever had, and maybe they're way more adept to wanting to adopt new technologies, or they already are, up to folks that are in their late 50s and 60s in branch as well, where they've never used a VR headset. So that was why it was really important for us to have a mix of geography, because in more rural communities, you tend to have colleagues in branch that have been there for a long time, and their tenure is a lot more. And so we wanted that diverse set of feedback, because if you just focused on like downtown Toronto, that gives you, I think, a skewed perception of how colleagues are taking it up. So I just wanted to set that context. And in terms of like who the champions were, they're actually a diverse set themselves. They are branch colleagues. So they're, of the 20 branches, there is an ambassador or a change leader in each branch. And that person is nominated and identified by the branch manager. In some cases, it is the branch manager themselves that puts their hand up and says, I love this so much, I want to do it. In other cases, they identify a person that really just has the passion and the focus that wants to really look at new technologies and be a change leader in the branch. So that's kind of the diverse set of identifying them. And we engage them through a mix of activities. One is we actually go and meet with them, which obviously can be a little bit more time consuming, but for the pilot, we felt like really important. We also have our internal social media where we set up like an entire group where these folks have a community that they can come to, talk to each other. Hey, I've gotten some feedback that people are having a challenge with this. How did you solve it? So creating a bit of a community amongst the champions has been really helpful. So that's what they look like. And I think without them, to be honest, it wouldn't have been as successful, because it would have just felt like, oh, here's corporate office just kind of, giving us another initiative to test without actually people that are driving the change at the grassroots level. And then to your second question, Derek, about the fear of adoption, this isn't something that's disappeared. Like, I'm not going to pretend to say that through our pilot of 20 branches, it's all been solved. Like, we continue to have this question come up around, well, what if someone breaks a headset? What if someone loses one? And my response is like, it's the same thing with like other technology that we have in a branch, whether it be a laptop or a phone or anything. They can get broken, they can get lost, and we just account for it in our business case at the end of the day to make sure that we've got, if we need replacements, we'll get them and all that. So that's all manageable, and I think just part of the day-to-day of having a new technology like this. And a lot of it is, we do find ourselves, and this is part of being a change leader, is like we're having to take the time with all the new leaders of walking them through the why behind this, and that it's not just a shiny object that we're just doing for the sake of doing it, and then getting them to understand the problem statement, getting them to go through a demo experience, and also sharing a lot of the proof points from other institutions that have tried this, like the Walmarts of the world and other organizations like Derek mentioned. It obviously lends a lot of credibility internally as well, and it gets folks at least open-minded about it.
Awesome. Okay, I was actually going to tell people to start submitting questions and or start to get ready to submit questions, and we're getting quite a few right now. So we're going to go there in a minute. I want to help the audience too on something Gordon just mentioned. So the failure rate on these devices is in like the 2 to 3% range, if that. So they really don't break very often. Furthermore, you can drop one from 2, 3, 4, 5 feet in the air, and it's going to be fine. That's happened quite a bit in our own office as well as with our customers. Not advocating for dropping one or throwing one by any means, but throwing one on the ground. But they are fairly battle resistant, battle tested, just like a phone, a tablet, etc. As Gordon mentioned. Okay, Gordon, I want to, as we're segueing here towards the end, and also getting to Q&A, we had one question just come up that I was going to ask you anyway. As far as what's next, so I'm just going to ask it now. So again, we're over halfway through your pilot period. We're hopefully marching towards a scaled deployment here moving forward. So another two-parter, and this is going to knock off a couple questions that just came in. One, how are you thinking about scale from a physical standpoint, i.e., where the headsets are going to go, a usage and adoption standpoint? How are we going to make sure that this is used on a regular basis? And then also we had a question come in about ROI and metrics, and what are the expectations of your constituents and leadership team?
Absolutely. So in terms of scale, a few things. So our pilot's going to wrap up in a couple months, but as we've thought about scaling this, it's not just like we're just piloting in Canada right now. And what we wanted to do and feedback that we've got is you should also pilot this in the US. So my suggestion would be if you have different geographies, it's important, even though it might seem the same, like a branch in Canada should be the same as a branch in the US, there's different regulations, there's different training models, there's different branch head counts in the US versus Canada. So our next phase will be to launch, and we're actually working on that right now, to launch a similar pilot in the US. And then scale, like it's obviously a loaded word because to scale something from our perspective isn't just to go from a 20 branch pilot here, a 20 branch pilot there, to now it's in all 2,000 branches. So ours is a bit more of like we're thinking about it, at least early days, as the phased approach. So we've done 20 here, 20 there. Let's think about going to 200 branches or 500 branches to test it out at that level. And that also ties into, like Derek and I have been talking a lot about, it seems like the pace of change amongst VR headsets, we're starting to see a bit of an inflection point, especially as Apple comes into the mix. And so we think that there's an opportunity to test out different headset styles as well. And so part of it will be like, as Apple launches their new headset, is that one that we want to test out as well? So rather than buying, 2,000 headsets all at once, let's go a little bit more in a phased approach. And so our hope is that by the end of the summer, we're going to be making a recommendation to scale across a much larger footprint, but having a long-term plan that we're working towards to get to our entire footprint. Because we know that training, like there's training needs all over. And one thing I'll share as well that's come up, which we hadn't thought of in the beginning, is I mentioned the 95,000 employees. We've got a bunch of folks in branch that we're focused on right now, but we've had a lot of senior leaders say, why don't you actually use this? There's a whole other host of use cases that come to mind. One of them is you have all these corporate colleagues that have never worked a day in branch, and you could replace that with a factory, with any sort of other modality where you have a corporate office, set of folks, and then you have folks that are more at the ground level. There's always this disconnect about, they don't know what we're going through in the branch. And we've actually started to test out this headset experience with our corporate colleagues that have never worked in a branch. And they're like, pardon my language, they're like, oh crap, like this is what it feels like to actually be in front of a customer, and it elicits a bit of an emotional response. So that is part of what we're looking at scale as well, is not just our branch colleagues, but how can we take this and repurpose it across others. The conversation about metrics, this is a big one. What we're thinking of, we always think about it in outcomes. So there's going to be a bunch of data and all this that we get from the pilot and as we go on. But really what we're testing out is, is our training now more efficient? So are we saving money by no longer having to pull people away for, let's say, a half day session to go role play and pay for travel and do all this stuff? And can they get at least the same amount of confidence, if not, we think more, is our theory, more confidence through doing something like this, and saving a bunch of time and money? Because obviously it has to make sense financially. So that's one that we're measuring and building into our business case. And the other is just like actual, what we call advisor or productivity. So, you take someone as an advisor that might be, currently only operating at like 2 advisor units per week. Like, as a result of doing this, are we seeing an uplift in their actual output? And we measure that against a control group. So we actually want to see very tangible, both confidence improvements is what we refer to it as in terms of productivity. Like, are they able to be more productive and successful as salespeople? There's customer metrics such as like NPS scores. Like, for those branches that have this type of experience, are we actually seeing higher net promoter scores? So I would say the 2 big buckets are on the cost side that we're looking at metrics, as well as on the productivity revenue side.
Perfect. All right. You just knocked out like 3 or 4 questions with that last part of the answer. So thank you. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. We're going to shift to Q&A. And not only have we had a lot of submissions thus far, we've had right around 100 people here the entire time, but also some of you put your Q&A in the Q&A section and some of you put it in the chat. So I've just been kind of monitoring both, and just bear with me here. So here's what we're going to do. We've had a lot of awesome questions. Some of these are going to be directly asked to Goran, given the TD Bank's experience and him as one of your colleagues and peers in the space. Some of them I will answer at a broader level, and some of them we're gonna do together. So the first one, we had a couple questions already came in about accessibility. So we had some folks ask about accessibility. Let me first answer this at a high level, and then Goran, please tell us how you're thinking about it and how you've addressed it thus far at the bank. So accessibility is really a multifaceted thing. First, let's just talk about the hardware itself and the VR, AR, XR experience. So again, here's a Meta Quest 3. So Meta Quest 3 and Pico and other VR devices, for that matter, if someone wears glasses, they can put the headset on right over the glasses, no problem. Some people, so that's a non-issue. That knocks out that. Apple Vision Pro, as an example, right now they're working through what to do with people that wear glasses. There are different optical inserts that they can put in to address that, but you can't put Apple Vision Pro on over glasses, at least not as of today. All right, so there's varying levels of accessibility with the hardware itself. Then there's the nausea or the fear factor. Some people simply don't want to do VR. Don't want to put headsets on. Some people, hey, I've done it before, it makes me sick. Okay, these are very small percentages. For the most part, we tell folks if you can be a passenger in a car, you can use virtual reality and you'll be just fine. But obviously there needs to be a plan for those folks. We've seen customers give folks the opportunity to opt out. They literally have said, hey, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. And then they have them do an existing 2D or e-learning type module instead. So that's one way that folks have addressed accessibility. And then lastly, Strivr, as well as others in the industry, there are 2D options. We can take a VR module and put it in a 2D web player. Again, I would not advocate for that because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of immersive and flight simulator and learning by doing. It's a lot more of a passive experience and an active experience when you're in 3D. But those options certainly do exist from an accessibility perspective. We don't want to preclude anyone from being able to use this. But Goran, please talk about how you're thinking about this at the bank as well.
Yeah, you definitely touched on a couple of them because initially we would get the same. And one thing we're thinking about early days is like VR from our perspective can't be like a mandatory thing. Like it can't be like everybody must use VR. There will ultimately be a subset of the population that it's just not for them. And we think that's a very small percentage. And we're comfortable with that because we think the benefits that we'll get from the vast majority absolutely are worth it. We've gotten like small feedback from folks, like the glasses one obviously came up. There was one, like we had some colleagues that had headscarves, but obviously like the headsets, you have the right attachments and all that for them to accommodate that. The other one that came up, which was interesting because we only produce content in English, but there's no reason, like we have such a diverse set of colleagues that there's no reason why, say, for example, in Quebec, we wouldn't have content produced in French, or in other jurisdictions, we wouldn't have different content for language. And that would be a very easy lift on Strivr and our part to build the content in a way that could be language agnostic. So those are the few things that have come up from a quote unquote accessibility standpoint.
Yeah, and just for the record for everyone, we have translated our modules into different languages. We also have closed captioning that we can do in different languages as well. Okay, great. All right, a lot here. I'm trying to organize these. Okay, so someone asked, this is actually an interesting one. I like this. You mentioned a project with Walmart. What does that look like, and is it still successful? I imagine it's vastly different from a soft skills training like with TD. Okay, this is good. So Walmart put 4 headsets in every store starting in 2019, 16,000 plus total. Those exact headsets are not there anymore because they're older and they've since upgraded. They have either 1 or 2 in every store with a higher end device. Here we are, 6 years later after that. But VR is still very much alive at Walmart. And Walmart's first training that they ever did was Black Friday training and situational awareness for store managers that have never been in a Black Friday training before or in a Black Friday before. And the only way to train on it was to go on YouTube and watch videos, right? Then they progressed to training for cashiers. Then they progressed to customer service. Then they progressed to active shooter. You know, unfortunately, but unfortunately, given what we have to deal with in this country. And then they did a number of different things in between. So actually now to the second part of this question, which I'd love Goran to jump in on, TD Bank may be starting with something soft skills and customer service based, but that's just the beginning, right? Just like Walmart started with Black Friday training, and then they ended up doing 40 things thereafter, right? And so this addresses another question that came in around distribution, scalability, change management, right? So once you get the hardware in to the bank, the store, the warehouse, whatever it is, the office, once you get the content machine cranking, once you get those ROI equations built, the way where you start isn't where you finish. You end up with, you know, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen modules, just like you do with your e-learning and all the other things that you do, right? So that's really important. That where you start is very often predicated on what are your current business challenges? What did your C-suite identify in your investor calls? You know, what are your team saying are the most pressing things that you need from the business units? But Goran, please talk us through, you know, how you're thinking about this as well.
Yeah, like our view is that the way in and the most pressing need is the branch and stores in the US. But as I mentioned, like once you establish this as a platform, we already have a laundry list of other use cases, like whether it be we've got a huge footprint of ATMs, like cash machines, like those need to be physically serviced. So there's no reason why for someone to get trained on how to do that rather than just potentially watching a video, they can actually do it because sometimes these machines can be pretty finicky. So to actually go through an experience like that, we handle everything up until like gold bars and like very like sensitive situations, all the way up to we've got a recommendation that we should be doing a coding training. Like how do folks actually do coding in different environments? How do they set up their whole tech setup and all that? So there's no shortage of use cases that we've identified. It's really, and this is what we found, even, my team looks after generative AI. You've got a laundry list of use cases. You start with some to get folks comfortable, and there's the ones that, are the most obvious. But once you have the platform and the technology, and as Derek mentioned, the content machine going, then it's just a matter of pointing it to different problems. Like, okay, we've got this problem that we think will make a lot of sense. And then, so I think the opportunities, we're just scratching the surface right now.
Wonderful segue to a couple other questions we got around content creation. So we've had a couple of people ask, okay, what's the process like for content creation? How much is on the customer versus, the vendor, the partner, someone like us? TD Bank is actually very unique in that they have a lot of in-house resources so that either today or in the future could take on content creation. So let's just hit on a couple of these first. So first, on average, a module takes about 3 to 4 months to build. And full disclosure for everybody, the number of working days in that 3 to 4 months are a fraction of that. And not you, Goran, or you, Jim, or Steve, or whoever's on here, but your organization is very often the problem when it comes to why it takes three to 4 months on average, maybe longer, because we have to get approvals, we have to go talk to legal, right? We have to review scripts. And as we all know, large companies, sometimes things can get lost and things can move slowly. So it certainly can be a lot faster. We've done it a lot faster, but on average, it takes about 3 to 4 months to build a module, not unlike a typical e-learning module. Our motto at Strivr is we're going to do it for you. We're going to do it with you. And then if you would like, you're going to do it yourself. So we always build the content for our customers in the first part of an engagement to make sure we do this right. And in the second part of an engagement, we try to put more and more in their hands from an instructional design or authoring tool standpoint. And then in the latter parts of an engagement and more of a mature relationship, maybe the customer can start to build content themselves. Maybe they're going to the third-party ecosystem in addition to using us. But that's roughly how it works. The customer's very often involved every step of the way, or involved as they want to be. Some of our customers are really, really, really involved in approving every word of a script. Others, take more of a hands-off approach. But, Goran, would love to hear from you about your experience in building and partnering with us to build content thus far, and also how you're thinking about it moving forward.
Derek's point is very true. It is us that, slows down the process, especially it's a new technology and all that. So anytime you're doing it for the first time, once you get the muscle memory, I think it'll get easier. But legal needs to review it. All folks involved need to review it. So I'm sure most folks here can relate to that. So that is the longer tail. In terms of content creation specifically, our view is a bit of again a phased one where we don't have the expertise in-house to like just immediately start building virtual, like I would say quality virtual reality content to the same level that Strivr did for us for the initial pilot. So our view is like we want to build this expertise over time and continue to work with Strivr and build modules and for our team to learn. But over time, like we've got a large scale design team that does more digital design, but we want there to be, our vision is that there's actually an in-house team that are experts in creating this content. It might be a small team of just like 3 or 4 people, but that they're constantly pumping out content. And so we do see this as a skill set that we want to build in-house long term. And that obviously helps the business case for us to be able to create it in-house because that cost would be reduced.
Great. Okay, this is an interesting one. I like this one. I've been doing this for a while. I've never heard this question come up on a webinar. So thank you. It's anonymous, so I don't know who submitted it. But this is good. This is a launching point to talk about other things. So it says, regarding VR headsets, does Dramamine work for those who have challenges with motion sickness, dizziness, etc.? All right, I'm not a doctor. Goran's not a doctor, so we're certainly not going to advocate for what to put or not put in your body, prior to engaging in a VR training experience. That said, here's the deal, and this is really important. And then Goran, I'd like you to reinforce that what I say after, because you kind of alluded to this. We're coming full circle to the beginning of this session. So again, if you can be a passenger in a car, you are not likely to get sick in a virtual reality experience. Okay. This is why people get sick. Okay. Someone just wrote motion sickness is a very legitimate concern. Yes, it is. But let's talk about why people get sick. Okay. People get sick in VR 9 times out of 10 when their equilibrium is off relative to what is happening in the real world and the virtual experience. So if I'm sitting in a chair and I put a headset on and I'm on a virtual roller coaster, or I'm being walked down the aisle of a store, or I'm doing a driving simulator, right? So if I'm doing something in VR that is not consistent with what my body is doing in the real world, my equilibrium will get thrown off, and it's very likely that I will get nauseous. That is a fact. That is a fact. Okay. Conversely, if you match the user experience in the headset to what is happening in the real world, i.e. they're sitting or they're standing in one place, it's very likely that people will not get nauseous. It will only be in extreme cases. And like I said before, we've done this a million times, almost a million times at this point. So this is a very well-informed perspective. That's not to say that people don't get nauseous using VR headsets. I'm not trying to discount that, but most of the time that is because the content is not very good, or it was built incorrectly relative to how someone's going to experience it in the real world. So if you are standing in one place in the real world and the headset has you rotating and looking around, standing in one place virtually, you're going to be fine. If you're sitting, right, or standing and things are moving, you're going to get nauseous. That's just a fact. So this is something that we take very, very seriously. Goran, would love for you to jump back in to talk about your experience with this. But by and large, whether you're working with Strivr or internally or with another vendor, if you keep that in mind, this content to human body equilibrium real world thing, people are not going to get nauseous 9 times out of 10. Goran.
Yeah, we haven't had much feedback about it. And we also do, I'll say, like just being a big bank, we do, have a bit of a disclaimer or a participation agreement for anyone that does decide to like go through the pilot experience in branch. And it just gives some recommendations like, hey, if you're nauseous, like it's best to sit in sort of one spot, don't move around too much kind of thing. So there are like kind of like what Derek said. But I think it does come back to the quality of the content, because we did have certain situations where we tested other sort of just like off the shelf content from other providers, and there were higher rates of issues associated with versus when you're building quality content. And that's what I mentioned, is like building that expertise on how to build it correctly is really important.
Great. All right, a couple more quick hitters before we jump off here. Someone just asked, is there a quizzing component in the VR? Someone else asked about instructional design. Someone else asked about talent development and assessment. Bottom line is we can do anything. Yes, many of our experiences contain some sort of Q&A, before, during, and after. VR, XR more broadly can be an awesome assessment tool for determining how someone's going to perform and behave and act in the real world versus just, multiple choice pencil and paper exams. Yeah, bottom line is we can do pretty much anything there, and would love to talk to you about that. Someone else asked, for me, Derek, do you integrate Josh Burson's state-of-the-art HR approach in working with your clients? Josh Burson is a very close friend of the company, so we adhere quite a bit to things that Josh Burson thinks. We also very much follow the Kirkpatrick level of learning as we're thinking about what our customers' goals are, or model learning, excuse me, as we're thinking about what our customers' goals are and how we weave that in to everything. Okay, we're going to do one more for Goran, and then we're going to get everybody out of here. There was one I was saving here. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. So Goran. All right. So we've had a couple questions, and then one person just summed it up. Talk to us about how this is actually used. Is it facilitator led? Is it hanging on a wall and someone walks up and does it themselves? So how is it actually used today in the pilot? And then certainly if we're talking about its scale in 2,000 branches, how are you all thinking about that moving forward so it's sustainable?
Yeah, it's a great question. We generally want it. One of the key principles is for it to be as least disruptive to their day-to-day operations as possible. And so in the branch context, we send one headset per branch. So imagine one headset's there, it's centrally managed by the ambassador or the change person in that branch. And then it's just that person, like it's able to just be signed out very simply in the branch, like it never leaves the branch. And there's always like an extra office in the branches that's not being used, just so like you don't want them out there doing it in front of customers. So they have a branch that's sort of, an office that's closed off, and they'll use that as a space to just go in, use it for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. And it's not something that they need to do on their own time, like eat into their break time or anything. That's regular. That's part of their shift to get trained. So that's generally how we would structure it. And we're not doing it facilitator led. Outside of like the first time they're using it, the ambassador will just give them like, hey, here's where you go. And we've built some guides as well. But outside of that first initial, like, here's how you use it, here's the controllers, that sort of thing. It's a pretty self-sufficient experience and pretty time efficient from what we've seen so far.
Wonderful. Okay. That should cover it. It is 11:58 on the West Coast. I'm going to turn it back over to Alec here in a minute to wind us down. But appreciate everybody. Appreciate everyone joining today. If you would like to follow up with myself or Goran, my email is Derek, DEREK, @strivr.com. Goran?
It's quite a mouthful, but we can make sure folks get it. So
yeah.
Goran.ilkanizada @td.com, but you can also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. No problem.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure that everybody gets our contact information, but would encourage anyone to reach out as it relates to, the work we're doing with TD Bank specifically, as well as obviously if we can be a resource for you as you are thinking about XR in your organization. But yeah, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for the wonderful questions and engagement. We only had 2 there for a while. I was getting a little nervous, and then the floodgates just opened, and there was more than enough. So hopefully we did a good job answering your questions and trying to connect the dots and bucket them with the themes. But yeah, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Alec, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, Derek and Goran, thank you both so much. And like you said, yeah, the floodgates really did open with the questions rolling in there towards the end. So thanks to all of you in the audience for your attendance and participation. And another thank you to Strivr for sponsoring today's webinar. It's an absolute pleasure to have their support here and an absolute pleasure to work with them. So again, this webinar was being recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email. Just keep an eye on your inbox for that. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us once more, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.